He wasn't supposed to be home that afternoon. The board meeting had ended early, and the private driver pulled up to the gates of his mansion. Inside, the halls were quiet, too quiet. Then he heard laughter, not his son's usual giggles, but something softer, warmer. He followed the sound to the sunlit garden, where his son sat beside their black maid, doing something that made him freeze in place. It wasn't what he expected. And in that single moment, everything he thought he knew about loyalty, trust and love began to unravel. Alexander Carrington had built his empire from the ground up. A self-made billionaire, he prided himself on control over his business, his image, and even his home life. His schedule was planned to the minute, his public appearances choreographed for maximum effect. At home, the person who kept that order running smoothly wasn't him. It was Grace, the black maid who had been with the family for almost 5 years. She wasn't just an employee. She was the quiet constant in his young son Oliver's life. While Alexander traveled for deals and conferences, Grace had been the one to pack Oliver's lunches, read him bedtime stories, and know the difference between his "I'm tired" tears and his "I'm scared" ones. Despite her dedication, Grace's presence was rarely acknowledged, beyond polite nods and occasional thank yous. Alexander's world was one of polished boardrooms and crystal chandeliers, not afternoon chats in the kitchen over cups of tea. And yet his wife trusted her completely, insisting that Grace had a way of making Oliver feel safe in a way even his own parents sometimes couldn't. That afternoon, Alexander's early return was unplanned. He expected to find Oliver in the playroom with his toys, or perhaps napping in his room. Instead, the house felt oddly still, as though everyone had stepped out for air. He walked through the vast marble hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Then, faint at first, came the sound. Low laughter, mingled with a child's voice. It carried a warmth he couldn't quite place. He followed it past the kitchen, past the open French doors that led to the garden. That's when he saw them, his son and Grace, seated close together on the grass, completely unaware of his presence. Something about the scene made him stop. From where he stood, half hidden by the open French doors, Alexander could see Oliver leaning against Grace's side, his small fingers wrapped around something in her hands. She was speaking softly, her voice carrying a steady rhythm like a lullaby. The billionaire's first instinct was curiosity, but that quickly tangled with confusion. Grace's uniform was smudged with soil, and a small patch of dirt was on Oliver's knees. Spread out between them was an assortment of items, a battered old photo album, a few worn children's books, and what looked like an envelope with faded handwriting. Alexander stepped closer, the crunch of gravel underfoot giving him away. Grace's head lifted, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second before she composed herself. Oliver, oblivious, beamed. "Daddy, Grace was showing me her family." Alexander's gaze flicked to the photo album. The open page showed a smiling black couple, holding a young girl in front of a modest wooden house. Grace's arm tightened protectively around it. "I was just telling him stories," she said, her voice careful, almost cautious. For reasons he couldn't quite name, a flicker of discomfort passed through Alexander. This was his home, his son, his family, and yet here was a part of Grace's life, her history, unfolding before Oliver that he had never been privy to. "Stories?" he asked, the word sharper than intended. Grace nodded. "About where I grew up, about what life was like before I came here." She closed the album gently, but not before he caught another glimpse, a photograph of a group of young children, barefoot in dusty streets, their faces both joyful and weary. Oliver piped up. "She told me some people didn't like her because of her skin, but she says being different can be beautiful." His innocent words landed in the air like a weight. Alexander felt the tension tighten in his chest. It wasn't that he didn't know racism existed, but it was something far removed from the marble floors and private schooling of his son's world. Now suddenly it was sitting in his own garden, being spoken aloud to his child. Grace's eyes met his, and there was something in them, a quiet challenge or perhaps a plea. "Children understand more than we give them credit for," she said softly. The remark stayed with him as he stood there, unsure if this was overstepping or something far more meaningful. Part of him wanted to end the conversation, to reassert control over what his son learned and when. But another part wasn't so sure. Before he could decide, Oliver tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, did you ever have a friend who was different?" The question caught him off guard. Grace waited silently, her hand still resting gently on Oliver's shoulder. The garden seemed suddenly smaller, the air heavier, as if the answer mattered more than he realized. And in that moment, Alexander knew he was standing at the edge of something, a conversation, a truth, a choice that could change the way his son saw the world. Alexander knelt beside his son, the grass cool beneath his knees. The photo album lay between them, its worn leather cover a stark contrast to the immaculate perfection of his world. He reached out and turned a page, more out of instinct than intention. The next image stopped him. A much younger Grace, no more than Oliver's age, standing in front of a crumbling schoolhouse. Her smile was bright, but her dress was faded, her shoes mismatched. Beside her stood a woman with deep lines etched into her face, her eyes holding both exhaustion and pride. "That's my mother," Grace said quietly. "She worked 3 jobs so I could go to school. Some days we had to fight just to be allowed inside." Oliver's brow furrowed. "Why would anyone stop you?" Grace hesitated, then glanced at Alexander. It was a silent question. Was he ready for his son to hear this? For a moment the billionaire's old instinct kicked in. Protect the child, shield him from harsh truths. But he saw the expectant look in Oliver's eyes. The way he leaned forward as if he already sensed the answer mattered. "Because," Grace began, her voice steady but tinged with the weight of memory, "some people thought we didn't belong there, because we were black." The words seemed to hang in the air. Alexander felt them hit, not just Oliver but himself. He had lived his life in boardrooms and private clubs, in spaces where race was rarely spoken of openly. But here in his own garden it was unavoidable. Oliver looked at her in disbelief. "That's not fair." "No," Grace said softly. "It isn't." Something shifted in Alexander then, a sharp pang of shame mixed with a deep, unexpected respect. He had always seen Grace as a caretaker, someone who kept his home running. But now he saw her as a survivor, a teacher, someone carrying a history his son needed to understand. And then Oliver did something Alexander hadn't expected. He slid his small hand into Grace's and said, "I'm glad you're here." It was simple, unfiltered, but it was also the moment. Alexander realized this conversation wasn't taking something from his son. It was giving him something far more valuable than privilege. Goodbye. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden. Alexander remained there on the grass, the photo album still open, Oliver nestled between him and Grace. For years, he had believed his role as a father was to protect his son from the world's ugliness, to keep him safe within the high walls and manicured lawns of their estate. But now he saw the flaw in that thinking. Safety without understanding was just another kind of isolation. Grace closed the album gently, her fingers lingering on the cover. "I never wanted to burden him with my past," she said softly. "But sometimes the truth can plant seeds." Alexander looked at Oliver, whose small hand was still in hers. "Seeds?" he asked. She met his gaze. "Seeds of empathy, seeds of courage. If children grow up understanding the pain others carry, maybe they'll be the ones to change it." The words settled deep in his mind. For a moment he imagined his son as a man, not just wealthy, not just powerful, but wise enough to stand beside people who the world tried to push aside. As they rose to head back inside, Alexander did something he had never done before. He placed a hand on Grace's shoulder and said, "Thank you." Not the polite, absent-minded thanks of an employer, but the kind that carried weight. Later that evening, as he watched Oliver drift off to sleep, Alexander knew this day would stay with him. Not because he had returned home early, not because of what he had seen, but because it had shown him something unshakable, that the greatest gift he could give his son wasn't just comfort, but the ability to see humanity in its truest form, in a world where privilege could blind. This small moment in the garden had opened a window. The question that remained was one he knew his son would carry into the future. If you see injustice, will you look away? Or will you stand beside the ones who face it?